still coming up? Big title, but anyway, the legislation was SB 1070 by Senator Kehoe, and Keith set it up right, where there was a lot of data out there. We're data rich and information starved, and I think you understand that concept. And in fact, a lot of the horror stories that we heard as council members were things like data teams. There'd be one spot in one river, and 4 or 5 teams would show up to take samples at the same place. It was critical, and they might even be doing different things for different agencies, but nonetheless, there was a tremendous need out there in the real world to figure out how to get things done in a better way. And that meant a lot more coordination. So there's a lot of money spent on data collection, unquestionably, and especially in the water quality arena. A lot of it is collected by individual agencies that are under orders, and so that is definitely one area that needed to be brought into a more systematic process that could be translated into information. That is the big output or the big result of what the council has done, is that it is converting all of the work into information. And I'll encourage you at some point in time to actually take a look at our web portals, because that's the product. The product is go in and you can get questions answered about the conditions and certain types of water quality circumstances up and down the state of California. And it is statewide. There were a lot of problems with data in the past, and includes the fact that people were doing different things for different purposes, but yet they were gathering the same samples in some cases and running them even into the same laboratories. So we wanted to make sure that in this process that we had the right templates, the right process, the right things to make data work better together. And that is one of the clear outputs, and it did start with the SWAMP program. So the way we work it now is that you have to have essentially what is then called SWAMP compatible, Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program compatible. And that gets the data in a condition where in many instances it can go into the system and has the consistency and the quality control and all the things necessary to make sure that the data is acceptable and usable. The other big thing, of course, you may recall that we used to have a teal data center in California that seemed to house all of the water data. Well, that model didn't work for very long. As more and more data gets gathered, it appears that no one system has the structure. Often it might be something not open source architecture. It might be a closed program or software or whatever it is that starts to run the thing. Even EPA's Storette, which is the major storage program that EPA has used for years, has struggled over the years to try and maintain the data. So one of the things that came out of the council's effort under the guidance of the staff is we have distributed management. There are a number of locations up and down California now that house data, and it seamlessly works together. Southern California Coastal Water Research Program is one of the houses. Marine Laboratories at Moss Landing is a housing information. We got information at San Francisco Estuary Institute. So there is then a model that we have that if you have all this redundancy and you have these other locations, you have a way to manage data where you don't have this problem of crashing and losing a lot of good information. So we developed a strategy then that encompassed a lot of these objectives. And the council wrestled with it for a while, but it actually came together fairly quickly. And so there is a document that outlines these elements and includes the notion that we have to have this process that makes data acceptable for the system that the Water Quality Monitoring Council uses. We have to have distributed management of the data so that no one place loses everything. And then the biggest and most important thing was the collaborative strategy. And the collaborative strategy, frankly, centered around, once again, instead of a structured data program where you have data on this, data on that, and you have to go looking for it, and you have to look for your favorite subject and figure out where it is. It's based on questions. The portals say, for example, is it safe to go swimming today? Or is my water safe to drink? Then you go into the portal and you have the opportunity to look around and find out whether or not the data is there and whether or not there's data for your area. And those work groups were centered around each of those themes then of whatever the water quality group was working on. And it turned out that Safe to Swim was one of the first. They were already working on it because, let's face it, millions of people go swimming in the ocean down in Southern California. And there are still non-point source impacts to the beaches, and they get closed down every once in a while as a result of bacteria. And so that's a very important customer that we have to make sure that those people are protected. And the agencies down there have been doing beach monitoring, but nobody was coordinating it. So they formed a collaborative group to try and pull all the information together and do a much better job, and then create this capacity for you to go in seamlessly and find out whether or not it was safe to swim in the beach. Unfortunately, with these kinds of efforts, and it's a note of caution, if it is a collaborative group and it is volunteers, they're not financed. These groups are working together based on the need for the information and the need to give it to their leadership. That one has fallen down a little bit. There was some external support, some money that came from the state to keep it going, but the work group itself has faltered a little bit. Now, the counties and cities down there, I believe, still have some responsibility, and the beaches are still posted, but I'm talking in terms of collaborating and pulling all of the work together. We've lost that one. It's fallen a little behind. Some of the others, though, have become extremely robust. We have six theme-specific interagency work groups: the Biological Accumulation Oversight Group, Wetland Monitoring, Healthy Streams, Estuary, Safe Drinking Water, and then, of course, the Safe to Swim. And we're working on now pulling together a new work group, Ocean and Coastal, in combination with the office and I forget which agency they're in, but we have a whole coastal group, that something that is not familiar to me. I've been more of a freshwater guy, although Brian as well on occasion. But the groups then, bioaccumulation is the safe to eat group, and that is, we have a lot of people in the state that subsistence fish, and we want to know how much fish can they eat in a week if it's got something like mercury in it. So that's the one that got together and pulled all of that information together. And now you can go into our web portals and find out what's the weekly burden of fish you can eat before you get a dose of mercury that's not good for your health. The wetland monitoring group is very important. That's one that has developed an assessment process that now helps us define wetlands better. There's been an argument at both the federal and state level for a long time about what's a wetland. It was started mostly by the coastal and estuary work group, and now they have expanded heavily into inland wetlands. But this assessment process then not only helps define what a wetland is, what are the characteristics that it has to have, but then whether or not it's in good shape or not. So it's got a grade as to whether or not it's functioning. All done by a collaborative effort, all done by people who are invested in and very closely allied with the desire to improve wetlands. We've lost 95%, I think is the number we always hear, of the wetlands in California. Well, some of them are coming back. They're making a very concerted effort in many of the coastal areas as well as inland. We needed to know what it is that makes them work, and this work group is pulling that together. Healthy Streams is another one. It's more related to the original swamp work, but it also involves not only chemistry but then biology. So We've got work groups that are then helping out and figuring out, well, what are the characteristics of a healthy stream? And it's a work group, and it's a collaborative. The other, and probably the largest one and the most difficult, is actually in beta testing right now, is the safe drinking water group. That is the #1 beneficial use, I think, that everybody is interested in this state. And the State Department of Public Health has had a very large database over the years, but it was practically inaccessible for the public. And so what we have done, we've brought them in, and they are part of a work group, and it is multi-agency, not just CDPH. And evidently they will be part of the state board if the budget gets passed. But we now have a safe-to-drink portal where you can go in and essentially right over the map of California, figure out where you are, and find out what is the condition of your drinking water. It goes to a little basic piece of paper that we all get in the mail, the Consumer Confidence Report. But there is other data back behind all of that. And I can't emphasize that enough, that all of these portals and all of the work that's gone into them has a tremendous amount of work that people have had to sort out a lot of this data that I talk about. Not all data is good, and get it into conditions so that it really works in the portal, and then lay out the parameters for making it work in the future. So every one of those portals then is built by people with very little investment. In fact, there's no money for the council, and as Keith said, there are staff that are maniacal that are behind it. In the case of our council, it's John Marshak from the State Water Resources Control Board and Chris Jones from the Department of Water Resources, because we do serve under 2 secretaries. SB 1070 put us under the scope of both the Secretary of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency. So that's who we report to. We just gave them an update, a triennial report on our progress, and we're asking for a little additional help, but because it does take a lot of energy to keep this kind of a collaborative work process going. And so if we're going to be successful, we're still in the beta testing phase as far as I'm concerned as a council, even though we've been around for 5 years now. It could be very tenuous at times, because the work groups themselves, if they're don't have a cheerleader, if somebody isn't constantly doing a little care and feeding, then they could fall apart somewhat like we've had with the Safe to Swim group. So any collaborative process like this is extremely difficult to maintain. I put up on here the portal picture that you can actually see. I actually wish it had some prettier pictures on it to grab people's vision, but it is what it is right now, and I think it will get better. But there they are. Is our water safe to drink? Is it safe to swim in our waters? And so if you go and click on those, it takes you to that portal, and it might seamlessly send you all the way to some place you don't know. That has been the work group's effort. So you actually see their output. The achievements then: consistent tools for monitoring, assessment, reporting. And SWAMP was the core of that. We've got the wetland assessment process down now that will help the state of California determine what a wetland is, where, and what condition it's in. And we've got a contaminant survey for all of the sport fish in California. That's another one. And this is the first time anybody's really put together a multi-metric analysis of watershed health, especially on the biological side. By the way, the biological side, folks, it's bugs. It's bugs on the bottom of the stream. So if you don't have enough bugs to feed the fish, then it's not a very healthy stream. So that's kind of it. That's where we are. And we do have, in a relationship with you, and that is we want to make sure that the Delta Science effort plugs into and stays in a collaborative mode with the council, so that all your good efforts and data and everything gets put into our system, especially the Healthy Watersheds, Healthy Estuaries portal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarge. Very interesting. Robin?